Hey everyone, Joe here. Thanks very much for joining me today. I'm here with a replay of a match against a Naya Company deck running Nahiri with Emrakul, sort of a mashup of the recent decks trying out Nahiri, which have tended to be Jeskai builds, with a more typical sort of Naya creature-based deck running Collected Company, along with a lot of powerful 1, 2, and 3 drop creatures like Noble Hierarch, Voice of Resurgence, Scavenging Ooze, Kitchen Finks, etc. Like a lot of green-white creature decks, it runs Gavany Township for late game inevitability. This looks like a really solid hand on the opponent's side of things. They've got all their colors in 3 basics, Gavany Township for that late game power, 2 Hierarchs to ramp things out and get those exalted triggers, which is pretty powerful in combination with some of their 2 drops. On my side, also looks fantastic. 2 blue sources, 2 Mutavaults to attack and cast spells like Master of Waves, 2 Island Walk Lords to make everybody gigantic, Master of Waves making tokens with all that devotion. Both players look like pretty easy keeps. The opponent's going to open with a Forest into a Hierarch. I'll draw into a Harbinger, which I'm pretty happy to see, having seen a Noble Hierarch on turn 1. The opponent follows up with their Plains and Voice of Resurgence, and instead of playing out their second Hierarch, pretty weird choice here, they're going to push 1 point of damage. I don't know, maybe they thought that they were playing against a different deck than Merfolk. Since I just ran out of basic island, maybe they thought they had to push damage. But in any event, pushing out the second Hierarch seems like it's always going to be the correct play. But they swing for 1, and with that tapped Hierarch, I'm going to be able to get a lot of value out of this Harbinger of the Tides, setting the opponent back on their tempo a lot, as well as their board development. So instead of having access to 4 mana this turn, when they could have played out Scavenging Ooze as well as 2 Noble Hierarchs, looks like the opponent's going to go ahead and get their second green mana in the form of Temple Garden, paying 2 life and the 1 from the fetch, going down to 17. They'll play out the first Hierarch, the second Hierarch, swing for 4 with 2 exalted triggers. That'll bring me down from 19 to 15. The opponent passes the turn back to me. Now things are getting a little bit clunky with all of these Island Walk Lords. Currently I only have 3 blue mana. The play is pretty clear right now. I'm going to go ahead and play this blue source, play the Island Walk Lord, swing for 3. The opponent will go from 17 down to 14, and I'll pass back his way. The reason I played this blue source that turn instead of a Mutavault was that I have a lot of blue sources left in the deck right now. Actually, as far as ones that are able to cast Merfolk, it's 16 in the deck. So 13 left in the deck right now, and I have 2 Island Walk Lords I would love to play out next turn. So I'm sort of playing this, hoping that I'll draw into another blue source. On the opponent's turn, he draws fantastically, hitting the Collected Company. He's going to swing for 4 again with Voice of Resurgence. I go down to 11, and the opponent passes the turn with all of this mana up. I drew into Echoing Truth, which can be a very valuable piece of interaction against these kinds of creature decks. We see now that there are 2 Noble Hierarchs on the board. I can get some value paying 2 mana to bounce his 2 1-drops. He'd have to replay them both, set him back on his mana a little bit next turn, but with all this mana up this turn, I'm expecting something like a Collected Company, probably also a Path. So I have to think pretty carefully about what to do. With the opponent representing Path, I think I'm going to choose not to play out the Master of Waves right away this turn, because this guy can make my board explode with elemental creatures and just take control. So I'm going to choose, I think, to lead with another Island Walk Lord, go to attacks, and leave Echoing Truth up to deal with whatever Collected Company brings in. So after some thought, here's the second Island Walk Lord. I'll swing for 3 and 4 with the Lord of Atlantis and Harbinger of the Tides, and here's Collected Company. I don't have any counter magic right now, so the opponent's going to look at the top 6, grab an Aven Mind Sensor and a Courser of Krufix. Now, the opponent's going to do something here that people actually do in paper magic as well. I declare my attacks. The opponent will play Collected Company, slam their creatures on the board, and immediately start declaring blocks. But actually what happens in Magic is, if I declare attacks, if you want to play something like Collected Company to bring a creature in and block, you have to do that at the end of my declare attack step. So after you resolve your spell and the creatures enter the battlefield, I get priority back. So the opponent's going to slam his creatures here and immediately start declaring blockers. But I'm going to tell him, I'm thinking before blocks. So the Courser of Krufix is a 2/4. I'm swinging with a 3/3, so the Courser gets to neutralize that 3 damage. With access to all of this mana, I'm thinking bouncing 2 Hierarchs is not quite as good as bouncing this 3-drop Courser of Krufix. We can see that the opponent has a Windswept Heath on top of his deck. Doesn't really factor into it right now because he can just play the Courser out and then play his Windswept Heath next turn anyway if he wants to do that. So the best tempo play, it looks like here, is going to be to use the Echoing Truth to bounce his Courser of Krufix, force him to use 3 mana to play that guy again next turn, and get in for an extra 3 damage this turn because now as it stands the opponent has unfavorable blocks. He would be chumping with any of his creatures if he chose to block any of mine. The opponent goes from 14 down to 7, and that'll be it for this turn. The opponent draws that Windswept Heath and immediately plays out the Courser of Krufix and that Windswept Heath. We see that he's got a Lightning Bolt now on the top of his deck. With me at 11 life, this puts me on a pretty precarious clock, actually, because we can see the Mind Sensor is coming for 4 in the air each turn with 2 Exalted triggers. That's going to put me down to 7 at the end of this turn. Now, I already used my Echoing Truth, so my only other removal is Dismember. And if I go down to 7 after the Aven Mind Sensor attacks this turn, using Dismember to get rid of his flyer and bring the combat back to the ground would bring me back down to 3 life, and he can close out the game with this Lightning Bolt anyway. So Dismember is a dead card at this point. Looks like if he attacks with the Mind Sensor, my only live draw would be Harbinger of the Tide, so I can bounce that guy off the board for 1 turn and keep leveraging more powerful attacks. So after playing the Courser of Krufix and the Windswept Heath, bringing him back up to 8 life, the opponent thinks about his attacks a little bit, casts Scavenging Ooze first, and then swings for those 4 points of damage. For my turn, I draw into an AEther Vial, probably the worst possible draw. Not too much I can do at this point. I can't deal with this Mind Sensor swinging for 4 and then getting bolted in the face, closing me out from 7 life. So I'll just play out my Master of Waves, make a ton of tokens, hope the opponent makes a misstep. I'll swing here for 3, 3, and 4. The opponent's going to think a little bit about his blocks. In the end, he's going to choose to block the Harbinger with the Voice of Resurgence, and then double block on one of my 3/3 lords. The Scavenging Ooze will eat it, my Master of the Pearl Trident will die, the Voice will die, he'll get a token, but none of this really matters as long as he attacks and then uses his Lightning Bolt. Actually, at this point, I didn't know that the opponent had a red mana source in his hand. He has this Windswept Heath on the board, so he has to have at least 1 Stomping Ground or Sacred Foundry in his deck. Pretty much considered myself dead at this point. I just wanted to make him play it out. So he swung for 4, I go down to 3, and I get Lightning Bolted. Pretty unfortunate conclusion to that game. The opponent got really lucky hitting that Lightning Bolt at just the right time. We're going to go ahead and look at game 2. I have an excellent opening hand with an island and a Mutavault, 2 Silvergills, can cast those guys off of that mana. AEther Vial is going to help me get out any double blue guys if I don't draw any more blue sources. Tidebinder is an all-star in this matchup, can lock down almost all of their creatures, any of their creatures. And Merrow Reejerey lets me tap stuff, lets me swing with bigger guys. On the opponent's side of things, he's got 3 lands. Noble Hierarch can lead to turn 2 Kitchen Finks, turn 3 Nahiri, also looks very powerful, but this Emrakul is quite clunky. The opponent kept, though, and I'll lead with Island into AEther Vial. Looks like the opponent was pretty set on playing this Temple Garden, even though they drew a fast land. So they pay the 2 life, Temple Garden, play the Noble Hierarch. My AEther Vial will go up to 1. I draw into a Master of Waves, which is pretty nice. Might take me a while to get up to the mana for that guy. Go ahead and tap my 2 lands, play a Silvergill, revealing the other Silvergill, and off of that, I'm going to draw an Island Walk Lord. So I've got a ton of power in my hand. I just need another land or 2 to be able to deploy all of it on time. The opponent plays his fast land now, gets that Kitchen Finks on the table, and goes right back up to 20 life. I'm going to move this AEther Vial up to 2 counters, and I draw Spreading Seas. That's an interesting decision. I can either play the Silvergill or the Spreading Seas here. But being early in the game here, And with an Island Walk Lord in hand that I can get onto the table with AEther Vial, I think I'm going to choose to take him off of one of his lands here and just draw a card off the Spreading Seas and establish that Island Walk for later in the game. Draw into a Tidebinder Mage gives me another choice. I can either bring in an Island Walk Lord and swing for 3 with Island Walk, or bring in a Tidebinder Mage, lock down the Kitchen Finks, and attack for the Silvergill Adept. I think I'm going to go that way because with that line, the opponent can't swing back for 4 next turn with Exalted with the Kitchen Finks, and I'll keep my life total higher. So here's a Tidebinder Mage locking down the Kitchen Finks. I'll swing for 2. The opponent goes back down to 18. It's going to untap. Kitchen Finks will stay tapped, though. They drew another Kitchen Finks. That's pretty nice. They're going to play out the Raging Ravine tapped, rather than the Windswept Heath, which would have left mana up for Path to Exile. I guess they figured they have time for that. The opponent goes up to 20 again. So I missed my land drop last turn, but hit my second blue source this turn. With AEther Vial still on 2, it's going to be best to play out Merrow Reejerey here. That will give me access to potential tap and untap triggers next turn with all these 2-drops in my hand. Again, I have this choice here between whether to play another Tidebinder Mage tapping down his second Kitchen Finks, or an Island Walk Lord to push a couple extra points of damage this turn. As it stands, I'm already swinging for 6 with these guys. If I play the Island Walk Lord, I'd be swinging for 8, which is a pretty powerful clock, but then the opponent gets to threaten attacks back with at least a 4-power Kitchen Finks, and I would be sitting back with only 3-power Lords, which I wouldn't be able to block with. Ultimately, I'm going to keep pushing this Tidebinder line, locking down any of his threats. The opponent takes 6, going from 20 down to 14. I've got quite a nice clock on the board, but the opponent drew into a Wiltleaf Liege, one of the more powerful decks that these green-white creature decks runs. They play their Windswept Heath now. Going to tap 4 mana, and without a lot of creatures on the board that can actually attack or block at this point, the Wiltleaf Liege is not as valuable as Nahiri. So the opponent puts Nahiri into play, and her -2 is very powerful right now because it can exile an enchantment, a tapped artifact, or a tapped creature, and I have all of those things. I have an enchantment, I have a tapped artifact, and I have 2 tapped creatures. But with these guys locking down both of the Finks, the opponent is going to exile one of those Tidebinder Mages so that he can start getting blocks and attacks online again with his creatures. So I drew into a Dismember, and I've got a couple of choices this turn. I can play the Silvergill Adept, reveal the Master of the Pearl Trident, use Reejerey's cast trigger to untap this Mutavault, bring in the Island Walk Lord with AEther Vial, and then swing with Mutavault and the rest of the guys. That probably would have been the best line. It's very aggressive, but having just drawn into this Dismember, I'm just thinking that the opponent's totally tapped out, and with his creatures, he doesn't have a very big board presence. So maybe it's better just to activate a Mutavault and just push some damage, leave some mana up for Dismember now, and I can always bring Silvergill in next turn with the AEther Vial and draw the card at that point. So in hindsight, I think my line, I would have chosen to play the Silvergill, untap the Mutavault, Vial in the Master, and swing with everybody for as much as possible. And also drawing a card with Silvergill and developing my board as much as possible this turn. Instead, though, I choose just to bring in the Island Walk Lord, activate the Mutavault, and push as much damage as possible. The opponent's going to crack his fetch land and use Path to Exile to get rid of my Island Walk Lord. Now, with access to Spreading Seas here, turning Island Walk on, it might seem like a pretty clear decision to use Path to Exile to get rid of the Island Walk Lord. However, I think that hitting Reejerey would be another reasonable option here, another pretty strong play, because first of all, the Reejerey is presenting damage right now. Second of all, the Reejerey can tap and untap anything. I have AEther Vial on the board. I only have 3 lands, so he's going to help me ramp my mana. But the opponent is obviously afraid of the Island Walk effect. So they go ahead and exile that guy. I'll go ahead and grab an island, put it into play tapped. And I don't really care about Nahiri here. So I'm just trying to push as much damage as possible. The opponent goes down to 2, and I'm going to pass the turn back to them. So the opponent is going to use the Nahiri here to get rid of my Merrow Reejerey. And in hindsight, that may have been a little bit hasty. I could have thrown one of my guys, the Reejerey, to get rid of the Harbinger. Nahiri the Harbinger, and just push 9, putting the opponent at 4 instead of at 2. Instead, I'm going to lose the Reejerey. Probably a misstep there. Couple possible mistakes this game, I think, on my part. Overall, tight play, I think, but where these decisions seem like 50-50, in the end they might have been a little bit more like 60-40 or even more. In the case of attacking Reejerey into Nahiri, that would have been the better play. Now the opponent, having drawn into a path to exile and gotten rid of my Reejerey, is threatening to stabilize the board, and it's probably my fault that happened. I drew into a land, which is a little bit troubling. I'm going to Vial in the Silvergill Adept, see what else I can draw. And I hit another Merrow Reejerey. But I don't want to give the opponent a chance to get back in the game. So with all of this devotion on the board, I'm going to play that Cavern of Souls and get this Master of Waves out onto the table. He's going to bring 6 elementals with the Spreading Seas adding 1 devotion. But without any favorable attacks with the Kitchen Finks untapped, I'm going to pass back to the opponent, and on the end step he's going to use that path to exile to get rid of my Master. Getting to be quite a grind. But the opponent drew a land too, and things aren't looking great for him. So with the Reejerey here, I'm going to add 1 counter to the AEther Vial. Now the opponent has access to Raging Ravine here if he wants to activate and block. It would only be a 3/3 since it's not attacking. A lot of people, I think, just think of Raging Ravine as a 4/4 since 90% of the time, the first time it gets activated, it's going to be attacking as a 4/4. But it's actually a 3/3 unless it attacks, then it gets a counter. So he could activate this guy and block, and he has Kitchen Finks to block and gain 2 life, and Hierarch to chump block if necessary. With AEther Vial on 3, I can activate Mutavault, swing with 4 guys, and if he blocks with Kitchen Finks going up to 4 and blocks with Raging Ravine, I can Vial in Reejerey. The Raging Ravine would trade with somebody. The Kitchen Finks would trade with somebody. But being at 4 life, he would have to block the Silvergill. So let's think through that one more time. He's got 3 potential blockers. I have 4 attackers. If he blocks Raging Ravine, Kitchen Finks, and doesn't have removal in hand, I'm kind of hoping he doesn't have at this point since he's already played out 2 of his Path to Exiles. If he blocks Mutavault with Raging Ravine, Tidebinder with Kitchen Finks, I'm still going to have 6 damage coming through with Silvergill Adepts. If he blocks block, he would gain 2 off the Kitchen Finks and go up to 4, but then go down to 1 off the creature that gets through. So how would that work out for the opponent? He would lose his Raging Ravine. The Kitchen Finks here would die and come back. He'd still have these 2 creatures, and I'd be left with a Reejerey, a Mutavault, and 2 Silvergills. So it's pretty clear, I think, in this spot that leaning into the opponent is going to be correct. Now, let's think. If he doesn't have removal, let's see. I guess I was already assuming he doesn't have removal. If I activate Mutavault, he can activate the Ravine, block the Mutavault, trade there. That leaves just these 3 guys. He can block here, trade with that guy, gain 2 life, go up to 4. Block, just chump the Hierarch, with the Hierarch, and take 3, go down to 1. Again, Ravine would trade, Finks would be left on the table. However, the Tidebinder would be gone. He gets to untap with the other one. So it's a little bit... I think the opponent might have forgotten about his Raging Ravine here, because we can see with this replay graph that he scooped it up in just a moment when I activate the Mutavault and attack. If you don't factor in the Ravine, then of course he can block with the Finks, go up to 4, and block with the Hierarch, but then even without the Reejerey, 4 damage would be squeaking through. Activating this guy only requires green and red. He can sack... Oh, let's see. If he needs access to red mana. So if he sacrifices this, he would go down to 1 life. So we have to assume that if he's activating Raging Ravine, he's going down to 1 life. To do so, he would have to use these 4 lands specifically to activate the Raging Ravine, and then have his 3 blockers. So he's at 1, not at 2. So now, if I activate the Mutavault, he could block with the Raging Ravine, block with the Finks on the Tidebinder, going up to 3 life, block one of my Silvergills, but then if I have the Reejerey, I'm pushing 3 damage through, and he would die. Now, I do activate Mutavault and attack, and he says good game. Now, if I didn't have this Reejerey in my hand, if I wasn't able to get in that extra point of power there, he could have blocked, sacrifice this, go down to 1, but gain 2 life off of this, and then only take in 2 damage. He could have lived through the turn. I find that opponents scoop early fairly often. Not something to be proud of. You always want to play, as long as you have any life to work with. That's my attitude about scooping. This hand is a little bit awkward. 2 Mutavaults, but an AEther Vial. A lot of great creatures and a Dispel to deal with Collected Company or Path to Exile. I think it's a definite keep with the opponent on the play, especially, and with me on the draw. But it's not the best hand in the world, but it's certainly workable. On the opponent's side, again, they have 3 lands. Oh no, I'm sorry, they have 4 lands. Access to white mana for Path to Exile, Eternal Witness to recur the Path to Exile, and another Emrakul. I have to think this is a potential mulligan for the opponent as well. But they chose to keep, and I chose to keep. They're going to open with a tapped Temple Garden, and I'll open with Mutavault into AEther Vial. A second Eternal Witness is going to be pretty good with the Path to Exile. So I'm not drawing into those blue sources that I was hoping I would hit. So I'm going to activate the Mutavault and swing. The opponent, with access to Path to Exile, chose not to because he sees that I don't have any blue mana. Probably pretty clever. If he did use the Path to Exile this turn, he could have then played Eternal Witness next turn and gotten back the Path to Exile, but chose instead just to take the 2 damage. Just plays out the 3rd land. Now, so the whole reason to not Path to Exile my Mutavault there is to keep me off of blue mana, since I'm obviously choked on that. I would have saved 2 damage, but tempo-wise, the opponent would have been able to play out an Eternal Witness on that turn that he just passed, getting back the Path to Exile. So I don't know, it's borderline whether it's correct or not. So Kira is interesting. It's a good thing I have AEther Vial, because it'd be pretty terrible with just 2 Mutavaults on the table. So pretty clear here. I'm going to activate the Mutavault and attack again. Before damage, I could bring in a Lord, but I'm going to want to leave this AEther Vial up in case he plays out a creature that I want to tap down with my Tidebinder Mage during his turn. So he took 2 from Mutavault, is going to crack the Windswept Teeth, losing 1 more point of damage and getting that Stomping Ground. Access to all his colors now. Plays a 4th land, plays a Hierarch, and passes the turn. With no creatures to use Path to Exile on, he's keeping these Eternal Witnesses in the ranks, losing a lot of tempo in the process, just leaving all this mana untapped. So I don't really care about this Hierarch. He obviously has mana. I don't need to use my Tidebinder to lock that guy down, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring in my Island Walk Lord now. And let's see, I have a bunch of 2-drops. I'm probably going to leave AEther Vial on 2 at this point, even though I do have the 2 3-drops as well. If I had some blue mana, I could have brought in a Reejerey, played a Merfolk, used the cast trigger to untap the AEther Vial and bring in the second Reejerey or the Kira. As it stands, I'm pretty backed up here with no blue mana. So I'm going to activate the Mutavault again and attack. The opponent's finally going to use this Path to Exile, targeting my Island Walk Lord. That'll give me access to that much-needed blue mana. The opponent takes 2 damage from the Mutavault, and again, I'm going to leave this AEther Vial up so that I can use it on anything that he plays out on his turn. So the opponent plays an Eternal Witness, nothing that powerful. I mean, he gets the Path to Exile. That's the powerful part of the situation. And then he's going to attack or not attack. I think he realized that getting the Hierarch bounced by Harbinger of the Tides is pretty terrible. And he, more important, I think he sees, you know, that I could bring in a guy and block, but then he could path it. So it's, I don't know, it's a little bit balanced either way. But if he attacked and I brought in the Harbinger, I could bounce him. And with a handful of 7 cards, he probably assumes that I have at least 1 Harbinger of the Tides. Now I have a choice here, bringing in Tidebinder to lock down either the Hierarch or the Witness. Now the Hierarch has a lot more utility, providing mana. Eternal Witness is just a dumb 2-1, so tapping it down doesn't really do anything. I'm not afraid sitting at 20 life that this guy's going to kill me. So, you know, I have to bring in one of these 2 drops, so I'm going to choose to bring in the Tidebinder Mage, I think, and lock down the Hierarch at this point. So I'll untap, I draw a Spreading Seas, which will allow me to draw a card. I did move the AEther Vial up to 3 there, now that I have this blue mana. One potential line is to use AEther Vial to bring in a Merrow Reejerey, use this new blue mana to cast another Merrow Reejerey, untap the AEther Vial, and bring in Kira. That seems pretty strong, so I have to assume that was the line that I took. Let's see how it went. Instead, I chose to just activate a Mutavault and attack. Interesting. This game is from like a week ago now, so it's been a while since I saw it. Oh, okay. Now I remember what the play is. I have this blue mana so I can leave Dispel up. If the opponent chose to block, I knew I was going to... I know that he has the Path to Exile because I saw it when he recurred it with Eternal Witness. So I'm trying to bait him into blocking with the Eternal Witness. And then I'll bring in a Merrow Reejerey, and then he'll path the Reejerey, thinking that he's going to get to trade with one of my lands, but I have the Dispel up, so I'm going to win that exchange. So I chose not to take the crazy line where I bring in 2 Reejereys and Akira, instead leveraging this Dispel to force a chump block here with the Eternal Witness. So he blocks, I bring in the Reejerey, I know he has the path, I'm trying to draw it out, and I go ahead and dispel the Path to Exile. The opponent's Eternal Witness is gonna bite the dust, and he's going to take 3, hold on a sec, 3 from the Tidebinder Mage? Let's see. Point term is Eternal, no, he took 2, sorry, and then took another 1. Right, so that's how that worked out. Alright, what did the opponent draw? Stirring Wildwood, and plays another Eternal Witness, getting back Path to Exile. Pretty solid. He's going to use that right now and get rid of the Reejerey, since those guys can lead to a lot of shenanigans. But I get a second blue source. Sitting at 20 to 10, I feel pretty decent in this spot. The opponent uses his last mana here to play out a second Hierarch. AEther Vial is going to stay on 3. I draw into another land. And at this point, this is interesting looking at these matches that are now like a week in the past. I actually enjoyed guessing what I was going to do last turn and seeing instead that I did something different. I think the line that I chose was very strong. It's possible if I played the AEther Vial, sorry, if I played Merrow Reejerey last turn with the AEther Vial, and then cast the other Reejerey targeting the AEther Vial, would have been a strong play as well. But I got the way that I used it, I got to use the Dispel effectively and got rid of one of his creatures in the process. So this turn I've got a lot of mana to work with, and let's try to guess again what I'm going to do here. Well, running out the Wanderwine Hub gives me a hint that I'm going to be casting some Merfolk. Looks like I'll probably Vial in the Reejerey. That'll give me access to tapping and untapping triggers. I'll be able to untap the AEther Vial to bring in Kira. So let's just see. I think that's how the line went. This is seeming familiar. So I'm going to activate AEther Vial, bringing in Merrow Reejerey. The opponent says okay. And I'm going to cast Harbinger of the Tides, targeting my AEther Vial with Merrow Reejerey. I can use the Harbinger of the Tides to bounce the Hierarch that's already tapped. But did I miss that Harbinger trigger? Wow, looks like I did. So Kira came in. I'm going to then tap an island and a Mutavault to put the Spreading Seas on his Gavany Township to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. Swing with the Tidebinder Mage for 3. Man, that's unfortunate that I missed that Harbinger trigger. Ah well. I always learn something with these replays. This Hierarch is still tapped down with the Tidebinder Mage. Oh, I'm sorry. I think this is another downside of waiting a long time to go through these replays and doing them with fast forward, is that this guy was permanently tapped down with the Tidebinder Mage, so I didn't actually miss the Harbinger trigger. I just chose not to acknowledge it because I didn't want to bounce his Hierarch and let him replay it since he's already being locked down with the Tidebinder Mage. So that was not actually a misplay, it was just a misread on the replay by me. The opponent's going to tap 2 lands, play out a Voice of Resurgence, but things are looking pretty terrible for them at this point. Draw an Island Walk Lord and things are looking even worse. I'm going to... I think I've just got this in the bag, but I just want to make it as efficient as possible. So I'm going to play out the Harbinger now, tap and bounce his Voice of Resurgence. Then I have the Island Walk Lord. I can just tap his Eternal Witness. And let's see. Tapping these guys, I have now... I'm swinging for... let's see. 4, 4, 3, and 4. 4, 4, 4 is 12. 3 is 15. He can activate the Stirring Wildwood and block, but I have Island Walk, so the only thing he can block is Kira. So let's take Kira out of the equation here. If he blocks... actually, he can't block any of this stuff. So unless he has some very specific enchantment removal right now in hand, looks like he's going to take 4, 4, and 4, and 3, so pretty much just overkill at this point. So he does choose to activate the Stirring Wildwood. I remind him of Island Walk, and he points to Kira, and scooped it up. So pretty interesting match against a pretty interesting deck. I wonder, how much Nahiri and Emrakul actually add to the deck, like which matchups this particular win condition comes up most often in, like the Nahiri Emrakul side of things. If they didn't play those cards, they would just have a lot more slots to play more value creatures. But it's certainly a very interesting deck. Great to see people trying different things in Modern. So thanks for watching, guys. I think I pointed out a couple mistakes I made, but if you see any other ones, please let me know in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, that's about it. I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.